Hello, and welcome to the Fear Channel, a channel with regular broadcasts telling the most chilling of urban legends, ghost stories, and forays into the darkest corners of the human mind. Those faint of heart or prone to night terrors should proceed at their own risk. Tonight's story is the portrait of a white magician, Gurdjieff. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff was a Greek Armenian born in modern-day Armenia in 1866. At the time of Gurdjieff's birth, this region was a major crossroads between the Western world and Europe and the Orient. As a result, philosophies, ideas, and culture from many distant parts of the world collided here. So all these influences were around Gurdjieff during his formative years, and had a strong impact on his views of life, its purpose, and what one can hope to accomplish in a lifetime. At the age of 16, Gurdjieff experienced a mystical phenomenon that forever altered his outlook on life. He recounts being deeply involved in his studies, reading a book in a nearby field one day, when he suddenly heard a boy's scream. As he ran over to investigate, he saw a Yezidi boy trapped inside of a circle drawn into the dirt on the ground by a group of mischievous youths. Gurdjieff asked the boys who had drawn the circle what was going on. They told him that when you put a Yezidi inside of a circle, they cannot get out. Gurdjieff went over to the circle and rubbed out part of it with his foot. The Yezidi boy saw the opening through this magic circle and fled through it. This dumbfounded Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff learned that Yezidis were a religious group living in Transcaucasia, mostly living in the area around the sacred Mount Ararat. Gurdjieff was so blown away by the incident he witnessed of the magic circle that several years later he conducted his own experiments. He had drawn a circle around a petite Yezidi woman, and it took 2 strong men to pull her out of the circle. But taking her out of the circle by force caused her to go into an immediate swoon, or state of catalepsy. Gurdjieff also learned that the woman's mental state returned to normal as soon as she was brought back into the circle. Otherwise, it took many hours outside the circle before she could return to normal. Apparently, there was a very strange force more powerful than one's normal strength that kept such a person imprisoned in such a magic circle. This experience developed in Gurdjieff an inquisitiveness and yearning to learn more about the strange and wonderful workings of the world's mysteries. During his youth, he traveled across many countries in search of life's meaning, convinced that it had to be hidden away, somewhere not accessible to ordinary man. His travels connected him with other like-minded individuals, with whom he shared information. Eventually, this group formed regular contact. Together, they searched for something much more than the world had to offer. Gurdjieff's travels and many exploits took him through Crete, Egypt, India, Iran, and Tibet, all during the end of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. Much of his teaching is influenced by the principles of Tibetan Buddhism. The principles of Gurdjieff's teaching rest on the notion that man is not born as he rightfully should be. People live day to day in a mental prison that keeps them in a state of waking sleep. Any person, if they are sane, needs to work in order to wake up and break free. Gurdjieff called his method of conscious awakening the fourth way. The first way was the way of the fakir, or the development of physical will. Fakirs would develop their consciousness by forcing the body to endure great physical hardship, with the goal of being able to master all physical obstacles. The second way was the way of the monk. This was an emotional path towards awakening through prayer and religious devotion. It developed mastery over the emotions. The third way was the way of the yogi. This was the mental path that required a great amount of time spent calming the mind through relaxation, concentration, and meditation. This path creates mastery over the mind. Gurdjieff's fourth way was designed to be a way that combined the best elements of the previous 3 ways, and used practices from each whenever they were best suited, so that one could master heart, mind, and body, as well as the will. Gurdjieff spent much of his adulthood and later years in life teaching and writing about his methods. He taught in St. Petersburg, London, and even traveled to the United States for a period of time before creating his Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man in France. Some of his more famous students were O.A. Ararat, a well-known writer and editor, as well as Peter D. Ouspensky, who wrote the better-known summary of Gurdjieff's teachings titled In Search of the Miraculous. Gurdjieff wrote 3 books himself, the first of which, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, was told from the perspective of an alien in a spacecraft, teaching his grandson about life on Earth. The goal was to take an impartially critical look at the life of man, and all the flaws of our civilization and lifestyle. It was written in a very difficult style of parenthetical writing that required one to pay close attention to the words on the page in order to extract anything valuable in its meaning. To best explain the type of mystical power Gurdjieff had, we must look at the words of his students when they witnessed him invoke many miraculous events. One such event was the restoration of one of his ex-students. Sometime after leaving Gurdjieff's institute, a former student came down with some unknown illness. He was feeling rather weak, and his first thought was, "I must get myself to Gurdjieff." Though not in much of any condition to travel, he made his way to the institute by train and taxi. Upon reaching the doorstep, he was rather pale and about ready to fall over. Gurdjieff immediately took him outside by some of the trees on the side of the institute. Those who watched claimed to see Gurdjieff transfer some kind of mysterious energy into his ill former student, who shortly thereafter felt considerably better and soon recovered from the illness. Gurdjieff was a little worse for the wear after this incident, appearing pale himself, so Gurdjieff excused himself to his quarters to rest. A few hours later, Gurdjieff was back on his feet as if nothing had ever happened. Of Gurdjieff's many miraculous expositions, none were as stupefying as the story of what happened after Gurdjieff's second near-fatal car crash. Heading for Cannes, when in passing through a small village, his car was rammed by a delivery wagon driven by a drunken driver, who with his passenger was instantly killed. Gurdjieff's 3 passengers escaped serious injury, but he himself was pinned in the buckled car between the wheel and the seat, from which it took an hour to extract him. He was perfectly conscious the whole time, and directed each movement with the paramedics to prevent fatal loss of blood. John G. Bennett, one of Gurdjieff's students, reached the Rue des Colonel Renard to see the 2 wrecked cars. From one of them, Gurdjieff painfully emerged, splattered with blood and black with bruises. Bennett realized and is quoted as saying that he was looking at a dying man. Even this is not enough to express it. It was a dead man, a corpse, that came out of the car. And yet it walked. I was shivering like someone who sees a ghost. With iron-like tenacity, Gurdjieff managed to gain his room, where he sat down and said, "Now all organs are destroyed. Must make new." Then he turned to Bennett, smiling, "Tonight you come dinner. I must make body work." As he spoke, a great spasm of pain shook his body, and blood gushed from an ear. Bennett thought, "He has a cerebral hemorrhage. He will kill himself if he continues to force his body to move." But then he reflected, he has to do all of this. If he allows his body to stop moving, he will die. He has power over his body. Although the doctor once there ordered Gurdjieff immediately to bed on risk of dying of pneumonia, if nothing else, his patient disobeyed and came to dinner as usual, with fractured skull, smashed ribs, blood-filled lungs and all, to the indescribable agony of those present. When he did finally go to bed, he declined the morphine that had been sent for, saying he had found how to live with the pain. He also refused penicillin, claiming that it is poison for the psyche of man. He also refused x-rays, and yet through some incredible deployment of inner energy, he knitted together so well again that by 2 weeks' time, he was back to his habitual routines.